So part 2. So those are the problems with the summary. And one more problem with the summary is that the 3 of these problems, plus any others that you've seen, actually all add up to reduce the credibility of the person who's writing the summary. So if you were to write sort of a scathing, one-sided summary of an article, it kind of actually reduces your credibility because people say, well, they actually didn't take the time to see it from the author's point of view. They just read it and immediately reacted to it.
Yeah,
right?
you sound like you have an angry rant.
Me?
No,
Oh, you're saying that about the writer? Yeah. Okay. So how might we correct these problems? Right? Might be a good thing to learn. Wouldn't that be right? Yeah? Okay. So, some corrections. First, you should fairly summarize the article or articles that you use. Don't alienate your readers. Okay? If you give a fair summary, then they think of you and say, hey, you know, this person seems to be quite knowledgeable. They're not, you know, ripping apart somebody's article. They're giving it a fair summary, a fair analysis, right? So then that person is then more inclined to read the rest of your opinions and maybe agree with them when they see that you're not out to get somebody right away, right? It's about the only correction you'll need in this particular instance of the poor summary. Questions so far? All right, next slide. Here are a few tips for when you are writing a summary with direction, or a summary for a purpose, when you're trying to achieve your purpose. It's a bit of a paradox, but you have to make sure that your own viewpoint is not overshadowed by the summary of the article or the other person's viewpoint. Okay? So you want to give a slight edge to your own viewpoints. You don't want to make the other person seem so great that your viewpoints can't compare. Right? Because then it sort of defeats the purpose of you writing an argument against it. Understandable? And how do you think you achieve the skill to write in this paradox here where your own viewpoint is not overshadowed?
Practice.
Practice. Very good. Lots of practice. And you can anticipate where this might be going.
Yes.
Yes. Now, another tip. You need to review the author's original opinion so as not to confuse it with your own. So as you are going through writing your argument, writing your persuasive essay, you need to always constantly be remembering what the other guy's or the other girl's opinion was. This way you can effectively guide the reader through your argument. So you don't want to start confusing your argument with their argument, because that will make it difficult for the reader. So one thing that I do when I'm writing, I'll often have the other author's, the summary that I've written of the other author's opinion, sort of on a separate piece of paper next to where I'm writing, so I can always be referring back, oh yeah, the author was meaning this, so I've got to sort of slightly slant mine a little bit different this way. Other questions? Yes, no? Are we ready to move on?
Yes.
Almost.
Yes.
Okay.
Good example.
Now, not yet. This next one Bastion's not here, but if you're watching it in New York or Washington, D.C., wherever you are, I think you'll enjoy this one. And this one is a satirical summary.
What does that mean?
Satirical summary has to do with satire. Do you know what that means? Okay. So, have you heard of a spoof?
No.
Like when one movie is made to make fun of another movie?
Oh, okay, okay.
Yes?
Yeah.
So, satire is like that, but for writing. So, you might write an article, and the way that you would write it would be making fun of something else that was serious. So, that would be a satire. Right? And typically you do a satire in order to point out the inefficiencies or the problems with the other article. Right? So, when you're doing a satirical summary, it can actually be a commentary in and of itself. So you can actually summarize something, and in that summary you might only bring out the points that are poorly made in the other person's argument, and by bringing out those poorly made points, you're actually implying that this writer didn't know what they were doing, what he or she was doing. Right? So, I sort of just said this one already, but by bringing out the shortcomings of an argument without saying that they actually are shortcomings, it can lead the reader to your satirical conclusion. Yeah, you sort of write your summary tongue-in-cheek. Like, you know that what you're saying is going to put them in a bad light, but that's why you're saying it, because you want to be satirical about this type of, this person's article. And we have an example of that type of satire coming up here shortly. And if you are a fan of former President George W. Bush, it's the person who wrote this. I'm not trying to give you any political leanings, but it just worked for what we're doing here. So, we ready?
No.
Okay, not yet. Overwhelmingly, no, we're not ready to move on. So. Now, granted, I don't know if George W. Bush had a speechwriter or not, or if he wrote his own. I have no idea. So this is not a reflection at all on anyone's intellect or character.
You're saying this tongue-in-cheek.
So, no, I'm actually not. I'm just saying, I don't know, so I've never met the man, so. All right, we ready?
In the corner. Get along. Cut my jugular.
Yes.
Whoa. He just scratched
Just
my
don't
neck.
worry.
Talking about jugular.
Drew, keep your hands to yourself, okay?
It's my fault. I'm there.
I don't know. I didn't see it, so.
It's always my fault.
Yes, it is.
It's always the man's fault. Just remember that.
It is.
You go far in your relationships. Always just take the blame yourself. That was tongue in cheek. Okay. So moving on. Yeah. Good. So here's a little example. So you might not necessarily need to write this down, but I shortened his name, GWB, George W. Bush's speech to Congress after the September 11th attacks. Basically, his speech urged the nation to have continued participation and confidence in the American economy as a means of recovering from the terrorist attacks.
Ooh, bang, bang.
Okay? So basically he said, this has happened, but we're still going to move on with our lives, right? So, there was a journalist by the name of Alan Sloan, and he criticized this proposal simply by summarizing it. And his summary in and of itself was a criticism of Bush's proposal. Okay? So, here's what Sloan summarized. Are we ready? So he said that the president equated patriotism with shopping. Maxing out your credit cards at the mall wasn't self-indulgence, it was a way to get back at Osama bin Laden.
America!
Now, that's not what George W. Bush said, right? But this is one author's interpretation of George W. Bush's speech and what he thought it meant, right? So you can see, right, that a summary like this is quite biased. He probably was not a fan of George W. Bush.
Not many words.
But it was biased on purpose as a way to show disapproval. Or in this case, to point out simply a ridiculous idea. Right? Now, I'm pretty sure George Bush, I haven't read the speech, but I'm pretty sure George Bush didn't mean to say that you should go shopping now to get back at Osama bin Laden, right? But there were implications in there that that might have been the case. Okay? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes? So when you're trying to satirize something, or use satire, satirize, that's a verb. Okay. Then, I don't even know if it's a real verb, I might have just made it up. But, that's alright. What was I saying? If you're going to satirize something, then I used it again. If you're going to write a satire of something, then that should be your purpose, and it should be fairly obvious that it's a satire, right? So the reader understands. Okay, I'm going to take this with a grain of salt, right? Questions so far? Okay, so here is your task right now. You don't need to write this down because I have it on a piece of paper for you. So we'll stop this.